Salams, this is People's Dispatch and you're watching the Daily Debrief coming to you from our studios here in New Delhi. I'm Siddhantani and on the show starting off the week, we have an update on the economic crisis that's ongoing in Pakistan. We look at why the African Union refused to allow an Israeli envoy to attend its summit in Ethiopia. And finally, lawmakers in the Philippines have approved a resolution to frame a constituent assembly to rework the constitution in that country. First up, Pakistan's National Assembly, among both opposition and Treasury benches, saw an uproar over the IMF-dictated Finance Supplementary Bill 2023, which is also generally referred to as the mini-budget. The mini-budget was introduced by Finance Minister Ishaq Dar last week, and members attacked the minister for the government's failure to deal with Pakistan's worsening economic crisis and stabilizing the Pakistani rupee. Dar aims to raise an additional 170 billion rupees through increased taxes on a wide basket of commodities over the next 4.5 months. This is in addition to prior actions agreed on with the International Monetary Fund to also secure early disbursement of about $1.2 billion in loans. There's also been a fuel price hike in the country, which has added further burdens to the people, particularly those in the most marginalized sections of Pakistan society. And joining us now to get an update on what's happening in Pakistan and what the likely repercussions of the mini budget are is Prashant. Prashant, while some of the measures, of course, target luxury goods and things like that, which most of Pakistan citizens can't afford, yet a lot of the measures will impact the poor the most.
Right, of course. I mean, we need to look at two aspects here. There is the mini budget, which tries to raise a huge amount of taxes through various ways, some of which, like you said, have to do with luxury goods. But there's also the petrol price increase, fuel price increase, which was announced after that. And this is after another fuel price increase, which took place towards the end of January as well. So that is the aspect which is probably going to hit the people of Pakistan the most. And we have a situation where already the January inflation was, I believe, 27%, which was, I think, a 46-year-old high or something of that sort. And I think economists have predicted that maybe in the first part of 23, we're looking at even a 33% inflation rate, which is pretty disastrous for a large section of the population. And, we talked about this before, but the fuel price hike is something which, it's not just cars or vehicles, because it just percolates into every aspect of life. It's about food products, everything's price automatically increases when fuel prices rise. So I think together, the mini budget to some extent, but also the fuel prices to a much larger extent are likely to bring about a kind of massive inflation that, and that's going to continue for a long time. And Pakistan has already been in this crisis for quite a while now. It's not something new. It's been going on for many, many months. They've been doing this whole negotiation with the IMF thing, which has been, quite patchy. In fact, like I believe there was a team last week or so, which visited. They didn't reach an agreement. There are conditions which the IMF has imposed that the government has to fulfill by March 1st, and all these increases in taxes are part of that. The idea is to raise some 170 billion rupees through to various kinds of taxes. So basically all this is being done in a way, in an attempt to sort of placate the IMF so that it releases this, I think, $1.1 billion or something of that sort that's part of that package. And so that the Pakistan government can deal with the fact that its foreign exchange reserves are dwindling at a massive rate. So why are foreign exchange reserves needed? Is so that you can actually import stuff. Goods. So it's a bit of a circular problem in a sense that you have a foreign exchange reserve crisis. For that, you need IMF money. The IMF automatically puts these kind of very stringent demands. You place these you accept these stringent demands. You place the burden on the people, and then also you increase interest rates, which is how most governments now respond to inflation, which actually again reduces the demand. So overall, the economy is stuck in this cycle of complete crisis, and there's no real solution that is there in the near term. So the government of Pakistan, of course, responding in the only way it can to some extent at this point of time, because it's not something that only this government is responsible for, but multiple governments over the past have brought it to this situation. And this government, of course, not making things any better by just accepting whatever the IMF has to say. So all in all, a very difficult situation, I think, for the people. Like you said, it's the poorest people who are going to suffer the most because of this, the kind of price hikes you're going to see. Are we going to end up in a Sri Lanka-like situation? There is a good possibility there also, because very, very tight situation as far as the country is concerned, because again, economists have also said this, that the IMF money alone is not going to change or save anything. It is very likely that within a few months, maybe a year, Pakistan will be back again exactly to the same position as it is today, again probably trying to approach the IMF again. So very difficult times.
You're talking about the IMF, Prashant. What is exactly the role and stance of the IMF in the wider context of leading Pakistan to recovery? Of course, the director is saying that if Pakistan wants to continue to exist as a nation, they need to sort of tax the rich and subsidize the poor, and there is some element of subsidies in the new measures as well.
Right.
But is that likely to be enough?
I guess the larger problem is, see, we have had decades of these kind of policies, and we need to, I think, again, we've talked about this in the context of many other countries. Basically, what the IMF often prescribes is a reduction of government spending, raising, deregulating as many sectors of the industry as many sectors of the country as possible. Not allowing any government control over business, which is the old measure of how these kind of economies work. But the point is that when that happens, basically you end up in this kind of a crisis, and then the IMF directors and economists and all can say as much as they like that we want the poor to not suffer, etc., etc. But it is inevitable that the poor will suffer in a context like this, and that's very important because economists in Pakistan have pointed out that over the years there's been a huge policy of deindustrialization. So. And that has been accompanied by the fact that the state has withdrawn from many key sectors. So what that basically means is that, a lot of Pakistan's economic activity is no longer, Pakistan is no longer in the situation to produce. And when it's not in the situation to produce, then basically it has to depend on imports to a large extent in various sectors, right? Yeah. And that basically hits your foreign reserves, and then you end up in this kind of a situation. So the moment the government starts withdrawing largely from the economy, it is quite likely that many countries will actually end up in this situation. And then governments really have no scope policy-wise to actually intervene because, they're not left with enough tools. And because there's so much deregulation, they actually have very little control over the economy as well. So while like I said, while the IMF might and other institutions might actually say all these nice things, the point is that decades of policy following their instructions have actually brought countries across the world to this situation. And I think it's very essential to sort of realize that. It's very essential to look at the question of debt as well in many of these countries, to which a lot of private lenders are actually the major contributors to this kind of debt. So all this together, very, in some senses, it's very natural. Like I said, I think for people who sort of follow what has been happening in many countries across the world, the patterns are so very predictable similar in some senses that it's not surprising at all. But that doesn't reduce from the suffering that a lot of people have to go through. And of course, in Pakistan, it's also worsened by the fact that there is a government which has very little legitimacy at this point of time. It's a ragtag coalition, not really able to sort of summon that kind of authority as well, or to make even decisions which or even think of standing up to some of these demands and stuff like that. So overall, like I said, like in Tunisia, like in Sri Lanka, like in Ghana, for instance, all these countries where the IMF has gone, there's the space for intervention by governments is narrowed so much
limited,
that all these governments can do is come up with these kind of budgets which sort of push all the burden and the suffering onto the people.
All right, thanks very much, Prashant. And we'll see after March 1, when that deadline passes,
Absolutely.
what kind of political impact this will have.
Right.
Right, next up, a senior Israeli diplomat has been removed from the African Union's annual summit in Ethiopia as a dispute over Israel's accreditation to the bloc has escalated. A video was posted on social media which showed security personnel walking Ambassador Sharon Bar-Lee out of the auditorium during the opening ceremony of the summit in Addis Ababa. Abdul, who covers the region for People's Dispatch, joins us now via video conference for details on this diplomatic dispute. Abdul, good to see you on the show. Tell us first what exactly transpired at that African Union summit that got underway over the weekend.
On Saturday, there was an inauguration for the annual summit of African Union in which Israel's delegate was there inside. And the video which is there on social media shows that the security persons basically asked her to leave the venue. Later on, the African Union spokespersons basically claimed that she was not invited. In fact, the Israeli ambassador of Ethiopia for Ethiopia was invited, and since the invitation was non-transferable, she should not have been there. But later on, yesterday, African Union clarified that Israel is not an observer of African Union at the moment, and therefore Israel's presence in the meeting was illegal. It was not desirable, and hence the delegate was asked to basically leave. That is exactly what happened. There was earlier a confusion whether she was invited, whether she was not invited. Uh, but now that there is an official statement by the EU commissioner, uh, which clearly says that there was a discussion. There is yet to a discussion which has to happen about to finalize the Israel's the state observer status in the African Union. Hence, such invitation was not there. This is really surprising, given the fact that if there is officially there is no invitation, and if Israel is not an observer, uh, uh, from where she got the basically the invitation, from where she got the idea
Or
to
the
go and
instructions
attend.
to actually go and attend, yeah.
Exactly. This is a mystery which is not very clear. But the whatever official statements are there in public, it is basically it is clear that Israel was there without any invitation, and they were removed because of the same reason.
Because of that reason. Israel, of course, the government responding to condemn this move, despite what you were explaining about the actual situation. And Abdul, also making mention of some kind of collusion between South Africa and Algeria to kind of orchestrate this entire, what has turned into a bit of a diplomatic spat. What's the story there?
Well, that is yet another interesting episode. Following the news of her removal, Israeli government basically issued statement in which they clearly accused Algeria and South Africa, basically collaborating with Iran. In fact, that statement says Iran, under the influence of Iran.
Right.
Extremist countries like Algeria and South Africa have basically taken stand against Israel. This is a language which is usually not used in diplomatic circles, but that's what Israel has done. And of course, South Africa responded to it, saying that um, since Israel is not an observer officially, its presence in the summit as an observer makes no sense. And in fact, the African National Conference, which is the ruling party in South Africa, came up with a statement saying that there is a resolution pending in the meeting, which concluded yesterday, where it was to be discussed whether Israel should be allowed to be an observer or not. Right. Hence, this Israel's attempt to participate in the meeting itself is an basically an attempt to influence the proceedings of the African Union. So that is exact. And then African National Congress called it an apartheid state, and of course that is the official position of the party for a very long time, and therefore it should not be given the observer status. So in fact, in 2021 July, when Israel officially applied for the observer status in African Union, there was a news reported that it has been granted the status. But the majority of the members at the time, for example, South Africa, Algeria, Tunisia, and several other countries, came up in open and said that they'd oppose Israel's observer status, primarily because African Union also basically has a strong commitment to the Palestinian cause. And it will be contradictory to give observer status to Israel, which is policies of which is a constant target of the African Union's criticism, all the member countries' criticism, and in a forum where where Palestine is also an observer country. So all these things has come out again in public following what happened on Saturday. And it seems that African Union concluded, the summit concluded without taking any decision on Israel's. It means that Israel remains to be a non-observer of the African Union.
Well, thanks very much for that update, Abdullah. Quite interesting story, at least the way it unfolded. Thanks very much. And finally, in the Philippines, the House Constitutional Amendments Committee approved a resolution calling for a constitutional convention to either amend or revise the 1987 Constitution, which forms the framework of the law in that country. 16 members of the committee on Monday voted in favor of the resolution of both houses of parliament, while the leftist Makabayan bloc and another opposed the motion. Among the proposed political revisions to the constitution includes revised term limits for both the president as well as the vice president, which could potentially give the next president of the Philippines 10 years in office. Anish has been following the story and has updates for us now. Anish, good to have you back on Daily Debrief. Experts who were called by the Philippines Parliament to sort of discuss the merits or demerits of revising the constitution have said that it's no silver bullet, and have also raised concerns, of course, about the terms that will be increased for key positions. But this is not a revision process that is sort of founded on one story or one case. It's a much wider ongoing process that is still being debated, I believe, in Parliament. Give us some context first.
Yeah, so it has been a long-standing call, actually, from different sectors to revise the 1987 Constitution. The bulk of it, like on one hand, you have definitely politicians talking about the very restrictive term limits, because as we know, a person can only serve as a president once for a 5-year term, and that's that, and they can't stand for re-election. And this is like one of the most restrictive term limits we are talking about. But obviously, it comes from a certain context, because the constitution was created right in the aftermath of a democratic revolution that overthrew a very violent dictatorship. So, in that sense, obviously, there were other provisions as well that also came about in that context, and that has been targeted. This one is specifically targeting the economic provisions, which includes like stuff that have protectionist measures for certain industries, including mining, telecommunications, and even media. So, which protects foreign, these sectors from any kind of as so to say, invasion of foreign capital or global capital. And so these are the things that has been target of any advocate for a constitutional change, and not necessarily other kind of these are not amendments that they're looking for. They're looking for a complete overhaul in many ways. So these provisions are definitely at the heart of the current discussion, and we see that reflected in the resolution itself, because I believe it was the second or third paragraph on the very first page, where they talk about these economic provisions as being restrictive, as restricting foreign capital, and puts Philippines supposedly at a disadvantage in a globalized world, and so on. So these are very typical neoliberal talk, reflected in a legislative resolution that was passed by a constitutional amendments committee. So these things definitely raise alarms, and we have seen already the opponents of this resolution talking about the three lawmakers who voted against it, all belonging to the left-wing Makabayan group, talking about how like the current economic issues that Philippines faces has nothing to do with any of these economic provisions, and rather than debating on that, we have shifting of goalposts happening right now. So obviously these factors are coming through in the debate right now, and we will see that happening in the next several months.
Right. So just quickly before we move on to the specific elements, other elements that the resolution kind of proposes, what next in terms of the process of actually forming this constitutional amendment committee?
So obviously, it is at what many of us who understand the parliamentary process of things. It's pretty much at the committee stage. So basically, the committee has to vet another bill which will be the legislative action that will put into place the convention's legality to begin with. So that bill has to be vetted by the panel, and then it will be both the resolution and the accompanying bill will be put to vote to the larger house and has to be approved by both the House of Representatives and the Senate. So it is definitely, there are multiple stages in the coming days. But once it is done, you will have a constitutional conventions or later this year, maybe by the end of this year, and the convention will be elected along with the local elections, or what they call the Barangi elections, which is basically the smallest administrative division in the Philippines. And this is pretty much as what they say, a cost-cutting measure to avoid increased costs, because as of now, several cost estimates by official cost estimates show that it can be anywhere between $250 million to $500 million, and if it is done separately. So there are definitely attempts being done. So all of these factors will be debated, and we will see that maybe in the next month or two how this process concludes.
All right. Thanks very much for the update, Anish, and of course, keep following that for us as things develop. That's all we have on this episode of the Daily Debrief. From Anish, myself, and the entire team here at People's Dispatch, thank you very much for watching. As always, we invite you to head to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, for details on these stories and all the other work we do. Also, don't forget to follow us on the social media platform of your choice. See you tomorrow. Goodbye.